Thunder rolled across the granite peaks of Ember Vale. Inside his cavern lair, Varrock, the last great copper dragon, curled his massive tail around a mountain of gleaming treasures. His scales, like polished bronze, caught the flickering light of the storm outside, sending amber reflections dancing across the cave walls. He wasn't admiring his hoard, the gold, the jewels. They were just a barrier, a fortress of riches to keep out the world he had grown to despise. Varrock exhaled slowly, a thin plume of smoke escaping his nostrils. 53 years. 53 years since he had last allowed a human to walk away from his territory alive. The memory of betrayal still burned hotter than his internal flame. He remembered the so-called friends, the hunters who had shared his fire only to try and harvest his scales while he slept. Their spears had left scars that never fully healed, dark streaks that marred his burnished hide. He rumbled to the empty cave, his voice a low growl. Let them fear me. Fear keeps them away. But the howling wind carried something new, something that cut through the familiar sense of rain and stone. It was an unfamiliar smell. Blood, sweat, and something else. Something human. Varrock's muscles tensed. He rose to his full, magnificent height, his vast wings unfurling to scrape against the cavernous ceiling. Intruders? In this storm? A cold fury began to smolder within him. Miles below, on the treacherous mountain path, Nadia stumbled through the lashing rain. One arm clutched her bleeding side, the other wrapped protectively around her daughter, Seren. Her dark hair was plastered to her face, a curtain of black obscuring her vision. She whispered, her voice tight with pain and exhaustion, "Stay close, Seren. We'll find shelter soon." The 7-year-old girl nodded bravely, though her small lips trembled with cold and fear. Her wide, frightened eyes darted behind them, expecting to see the bobbing torches of the bandits who had razed their village. "Will they find us, Mama?" Seren asked, her voice a tiny thread of sound, nearly lost in the roar of the storm. Nadia tightened her grip on her healing satchel. It was the only thing she had managed to save when they fled their burning home. "No, my star," she promised, her voice more confident than she felt. "The rain will hide our tracks." But the wound in her side throbbed with every agonizing step. They had been running for 3 days, hiding in ditches, foraging for berries. Her strength was nearly gone. If she didn't find shelter soon, if she couldn't tend to her injury, she feared what would become of her daughter. Then a brilliant flash of lightning split the sky, illuminating a dark opening in the mountainside just ahead. "There!" Nadia gasped, a surge of hope piercing her despair. "A cave!" They stumbled towards it, collapsing into the entrance, unaware that they were crossing an invisible boundary, a line that had remained undisturbed for over half a century. The mouth of the cave was larger than it had appeared from a distance. Its depths stretched into an impenetrable blackness, swallowing the weak light of the storm. Seren shivered, but not just from cold. "It's warm in here," she whispered, her small hands outstretched, feeling the surprisingly heated air that radiated from within. Nadia frowned. Her healer's instincts screamed that this was wrong. Normal caves were damp and cold. They didn't radiate warmth like a hearth. But they had no choice. The storm was a monster at their backs, and the bandits were a memory too fresh to ignore. "We'll rest just inside, away from the rain," she decided, guiding Seren to a relatively flat section of stone near the entrance. She carefully lowered herself beside her daughter, the pain in her side flaring into a white-hot agony. Finally, she allowed herself to examine the wound in the dim gray light. The makeshift bandage was soaked through with blood. The knife slash was deeper than she had thought, long and angry against her skin. Seren's small, gentle fingers brushed Nadia's pale cheek. "Are you hurting badly?" she asked, her voice full of a child's pure concern. Nadia forced a smile, trying to hide the wave of dizziness that washed over her. "It's nothing I can't mend, my love," she lied. Once we're safe. Deep within the mountain, Varrock moved like a shadow through the labyrinthine tunnels that were his domain. He tracked the intruders by their scent, a scent that was now thick in the air. His golden pupils narrowed to slits as a familiar, searing fury built within him. Humans, in his sanctuary, in his home, the audacity of it, the sheer disrespect, inflamed his rage. He would make them pay for this intrusion. As he neared the cave entrance, he slowed his approach, his massive form blending with the dark stone. He moved with a silence that defied his size, a predator closing in on its prey. Then he stopped, listening. He heard voices, the soft, trembling voice of a child and a woman's gentle, reassuring reply. Not hunters, then. Not warriors come for his hide or his hoard. But humans were deceitful by nature. Hadn't he learned that lesson in scars and blood? He crept closer, his heart a cold, hard stone in his chest. His plan was simple: incinerate them where they stood. Peering through the gloom, he saw them. He saw the woman, her face pale with pain, her hands steady as she worked to clean her wound. He saw the child beside her, so small, so fragile, watching her mother with solemn eyes, eyes that held a wisdom far too old for her years. And for the first time in 53 years, Varrock hesitated. The image before him, a mother and her child, vulnerable, in pain, yet radiating a quiet dignity in their distress, stirred something within the dragon. A long dormant memory flickered in the dark corners of his mind. The feeling of his own mother's protective wings, the warmth of her presence, the safety she represented. This woman, this human, was doing the same for her young. The storm outside intensified, its fury trapping them all together in this strange, suspended moment. The woman winced, her breath hissing through her teeth as she cleaned her injury. The child, Seren, reached out and placed a tiny hand on her mother's arm, a simple, comforting gesture. Varrock watched, unseen in the shadows. His rage, once a roaring inferno, had cooled to embers. What were these creatures? Not a threat. They were refugees, seeking shelter from a world that had been as cruel to them as it had been to him. The child looked around the dark cave, not with greed, but with a simple, weary need for rest. He thought of the gold piled high in his inner sanctum. It had brought him nothing but solitude and bitterness. He thought of the fear he had so carefully cultivated in the hearts of men. It had kept him safe, but it had also encased him in a prison of his own making. Here, at the edge of his domain, was a life-or-death drama playing out. The woman's life was fading. Without proper care, the wound would fester. She would die, and the child would be left alone on this unforgiving mountain. Alone, just like him. The dragon's claws scraped softly against the stone floor as he made a decision. It was a choice that went against every instinct he had honed for decades. He took a slow, deliberate step out of the deepest shadows, not with a roar of aggression, but with a quiet, resonant hum that vibrated through the very rock beneath them. He would not be their destroyer. Perhaps, after a lifetime of darkness, he could be their salvation. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more adventures. The feeling of being watched prickled at Nadia's skin long before she saw anything. A subtle shift in the air, a drop in temperature. It was a primal sense she'd learned to trust. She pulled her daughter, Seren, closer, her body a shield against the unknown dangers of the cave. Then she saw them, two enormous eyes, glowing like ancient amber in the oppressive darkness. A low growl rumbled through the cavern, and Nadia's heart hammered against her ribs. Dragon. The word was a silent, terrified whisper in her mind. Instinct took over, and she positioned herself firmly between the monstrous creature and her child. From the deeper shadows, the dragon emerged. His scales, the color of burnished copper, caught the faint moonlight filtering through the cave's entrance. making him look like he was forged from a dying star. The voice that came from him was like stones grinding together, an ancient, powerful sound. "You trespass," he growled. Nadia expected herself to scream, to grab Seren and run, but she did neither. Despite the searing pain from the wound in her side, she straightened her back, meeting the dragon's intense gaze without flinching. "We seek only shelter," she said, her voice surprisingly even. "Shelter from the storm, and from the men who destroyed our village." Curiosity overriding fear, little Seren peeked around her mother's legs. Her eyes, wide and innocent, held no terror, only a profound sense of wonder. "Your scales," she said, her small voice clear and bright in the vast cave. "They look like a sunset." The dragon, whose name was Varrock, let out a short, sharp snort, a small plume of smoke curling from his nostrils. "Flattery will not save you, little one." "It's not flattery if it's true," Seren replied with the simple, unshakable logic of a child. Varrock was taken aback. He hadn't expected this. He had expected terror, begging, maybe even a foolish attempt to fight. But this was different. His gaze shifted to the woman, Nadia. He saw the dark stain of blood on her tunic, the slight sway in her stance that betrayed her weakness. Yet her eyes remained defiant, fiercely protective. He was a creature of immense power, and she was a wounded human, yet she stood before him as an equal. A deep rumble started in his chest, a sound that could have been a growl but softened into something else. "One night," he finally conceded, "when the storm passes, you will leave." Relief washed over Nadia's face, so pure and potent it was almost painful to see. "Thank you," she breathed, the words barely audible. She guided Seren deeper into the relative warmth of the cave, finding a dry spot far from the entrance. Varrock watched them settle, a strange and unfamiliar feeling stirring within him. He told himself it was just for one night, but one night stretched into 3. The storm outside raged on, a convenient excuse for Varrock to keep the humans in his sanctuary. He told himself he was merely waiting for better weather, that their presence was a minor inconvenience. But the truth was, he found himself intrigued. He watched Nadia as she tended to her wound, her knowledge of herbs and remedies surprisingly extensive. He listened to Seren's endless stream of questions, her innocent curiosity a stark contrast to the fear and greed he usually saw in humans. On the 3rd evening, as Nadia was meticulously sorting a small pouch of dried herbs, Seren approached him. "Why do you live all alone?" she asked, tilting her head. The question was simple, but the answer was heavy with centuries of betrayal and loss. "Humans cannot be trusted," Varrock replied, his voice a low growl. Seren didn't even hesitate. She looked from the massive dragon to her mother and back again, her expression one of complete conviction. "My mama can," she said simply. Varrock looked at Nadia. He saw the lines of exhaustion etched on her face, but also the gentle precision in her movements as she prepared a poultice. He had seen humans lie, steal, and betray for far less than the treasure he guarded. He had seen their darkness and their greed. But watching this woman, her quiet strength, her devotion to her child, for the first time in a very long time, Varrock found himself wondering. Maybe, just maybe, this one was different. By the 7th day, the atmosphere in the cave had transformed. The initial tension had melted away, replaced by a quiet, comfortable rhythm. The storm had long passed, but none of them mentioned it. Varrock found himself sharing stories he hadn't spoken aloud in centuries, tales of ancient dragon migrations across starlit skies and forgotten continents. Nadia would listen, her intelligent eyes absorbing every word, her own quiet wisdom a mirror to his ancient knowledge. The cave itself seemed to have accepted them. A strange, ambient warmth, emanated from the stone walls, a latent magic that, combined with Nadia's remedies, was accelerating the healing of her wound. One evening, as he watched her crush leaves into a fragrant paste, Varrock admitted something he never thought he would say to a human. "Your knowledge of plants rivals that of the elders of my kind." Nadia looked up, and for the first time, he saw a genuine, unguarded smile grace her lips. It transformed her face, chasing away the shadows of grief and exhaustion. "My grandmother taught me," she said, her voice soft. "She believed that the ability to heal was a sacred trust." "Like guarding treasure," Varrock mused, the comparison coming to him naturally. "More valuable than gold," Nadia agreed. Their eyes met across the flickering firelight, and in that shared glance, a profound understanding passed between them. An unspoken acknowledgement of shared values, of a bond forming in the most unlikely of circumstances. The fragile peace of their moment was shattered in an instant. Seren, who had been drawing patterns in the dust, suddenly cried out and collapsed. Nadia was at her side in a heartbeat. The child's skin was scorching hot, her breathing shallow and rapid. A sudden, violent fever had taken hold. Panic flared in Nadia's eyes as she worked frantically, applying cool cloths and trying to get Seren to drink a herbal infusion. But none of her remedies worked. The fever climbed, and the child's small body was racked with tremors. "She needs help beyond my skills," Nadia finally whispered, her voice choked with desperation and rising terror. "I don't know what to do." Varrock, who had been watching with growing alarm, felt a hesitation born of centuries of isolation. To interfere was to reveal more of himself, to risk a deeper connection. But looking at the fading light in the child's eyes and the sheer agony on her mother's face, the choice was clear. He lowered his massive scaled head until he was level with the feverish child. "Step back," he commanded, his voice a low, urgent rumble. Nadia looked at him, confusion and fear warring in her eyes. "What are you—" "Trust me," he said, and the words felt foreign, yet right on his tongue. Nadia took a hesitant step back, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Varrock took a deep, controlled breath and then exhaled. It wasn't a torrent of flame, but a gentle, glowing cloud of warm air. It shimmered with thousands of tiny, golden embers, like captured starlight. The embers floated down and settled on Serene's skin, not burning her, but sinking into her, absorbed without a trace. "Dragon fire can heal what herbs cannot," Varrock explained softly, his voice barely a whisper. "It purifies and restores the life force." Nadia watched, mesmerized and breathless, as the violent shivering ceased and the frantic flush on Seren's cheeks began to fade. They kept watch through the night, a silent vigil shared between woman and dragon. By morning, the fever had broken completely. Seren was sleeping peacefully, her breathing deep and even. Overwhelmed with a gratitude that transcended words, Nadia reached out and placed her hand on Varrock's massive scaled foreleg. It was the first time she had initiated contact, the first time she had touched him without fear. Her fingers were warm against his cool copper scales. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. As her warmth seeped into him, something long dormant and frozen deep within Varrock's chest stirred. A feeling that was entirely unfamiliar, yet strangely, wonderfully welcome. Meanwhile, miles away, the smoke from Nadia's burned village had long since cleared. In the replacement settlement of Thornhill, a man named Darian stood before a crowd of eager hunters. He was the one who had led the raid, driven by greed for land and resources. But to the world, he needed a different story. "The tracks lead to the mountains," he declared, his voice ringing with false authority. "The dragon must have taken the woman and her child. We will be hailed as heroes when we rescue them and slay the beast that plagues our lands." A roar of approval went up from the men. They gathered their spears and swords, their minds filled with visions of glory and treasure, completely unaware of the true nature of the beast they sought to kill and the fragile peace they were about to shatter. The attack came at dawn. Varrock sensed the approaching humans first, rousing Nadia with a low, warning growl. "Stay in the inner chamber with Seren," he commanded, his voice a deep rumble. Nadia reached out and touched his massive snout, her eyes filled with a new determination. "No more hiding," she said firmly. "No more fighting alone." Outside the cave, Darian led a group of 20 men, all armed with spears and bows, their faces grim in the early morning light. "Remember," he shouted, his voice echoing against the rocks, "aim for the eyes or the underbelly." As Varrock emerged from the cave mouth, his vast wings unfurled in a threatening display, a ripple of fear went through the villagers. Many faltered, their courage failing them in the face of such a magnificent, terrifying creature. But their hesitation turned to utter confusion when Nadia walked calmly out to stand beside the dragon. She placed a hand on his warm, scaly flank, a silent gesture of solidarity. "Lower your weapons," she called out, her voice clear and strong. "No one here has harmed us." "Step away from that monster," Darian demanded, his spear still pointed at Varrock. Nadia's gaze was unwavering. "The only monsters I see are the ones who carried torches and knives against an innocent village," she replied, her words sharp. "This dragon has shown more humanity than those men ever did." Varrock felt a strange conflict within him. For decades, he had harbored a deep-seated fury against humans. He could unleash it now, a storm of fire and vengeance. But then he looked at the woman beside him, at the incredible trust she had placed in him. As he wrestled with this choice, a small figure darted from the cave. It was Seren, her face streaked with tears, her body trembling. She ran to stand protectively in front of Varrock, her tiny arms spread wide. "Don't hurt my friend!" she cried, her small voice piercing the tense silence. The scene froze the villagers in place. A child defending a dragon. A woman standing unafraid beside a creature of legend. It was a sight that defied everything they thought they knew. "If you attack him," Nadia said quietly, her voice carrying a final undeniable weight, "you will lose my healing skills forever." A murmur spread through the crowd. They recognized her now, the renowned healer from the neighboring valleys, whose skills were spoken of in whispers of awe. Darian's authority crumbled. One by one, the villagers lowered their weapons, their fear slowly giving way to a dawning sense of wonder. The threat had passed, not through violence, but through an act of impossible courage. Spring came to Ember Vale, and with it, a transformation. Wildflowers carpeted the once barren mountainside, painting the slopes in vibrant colors. The cave that had been Varrock's lonely sanctuary for centuries now bustled with a quiet, steady activity. Villagers, still cautious but hopeful, began to make the journey up the mountain, bringing their sick and injured for Nadia's care. Sometimes Varrock would assist, his gentle, controlled ember breath accelerating the healing process in a way that seemed miraculous. "I never imagined this," Varrock confessed one evening. They sat together on the ledge outside the cave, watching Seren playing below with a group of village children who had finally overcome their fear of him. Laughter, clear and bright, drifted up on the breeze. Nadia smiled, her hand finding his scaled claw and resting there. "Fear keeps everyone isolated," she said softly. "Trust is what builds bridges." Their relationship had bloomed into something neither could have predicted. It was a bond that transcended species, born from mutual respect and a shared purpose. When Nadia treated her patients, Varrock would observe, a silent, powerful guardian. When Varrock patrolled the valley's boundaries, soaring high above the peaks, Nadia often accompanied him. From their aerial view, she would point out different plants, teaching him the names and properties of the medicinal herbs that grew in the hidden corners of the mountains. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, they perched on a high cliff overlooking the peaceful valley. Nadia leaned against his warm, solid scales, a comfortable and familiar gesture now. "I should thank those bandits," she said softly. Varrock rumbled, a low, questioning sound. "They drove me from my home," she explained, her voice thoughtful. "They drove me here to you. Sometimes losing something opens the door to something you never expected to find." Varrock gently curved his wing around her, a protective, tender embrace. "I lived for centuries in solitude," he admitted, his voice a deep baritone. "I was convinced I needed no one." "And now?" Nadia asked, looking up at his magnificent head, his golden eyes no longer fierce, but soft with affection. "Now," he answered, his voice resonating with a truth that shook him to his core. "Now I cannot imagine these mountains without your footsteps." That night, under a brilliant canopy of stars, Varrock created a spectacle just for them. He breathed out a cloud of tiny, floating embers that hovered in the air inside the cave, transforming the dark stone ceiling into a personal galaxy. Seren gasped in delight, jumping and laughing as she tried to catch the magical glowing specks of light. Nadia watched, her heart full, as the dragon who had become her unlikely partner, her friend, her family, created this moment of pure joy. Later, after Seren had fallen asleep, wrapped in warm furs and dreaming of starlight, Nadia approached Varrock. He was resting, his massive form filling the chamber, the last of the embers slowly fading around them. She placed her hands on either side of his great face, feeling the warmth and ancient power beneath his scales. "Some people say a dragon and a human can never truly understand each other," she whispered, her voice barely disturbing the quiet. Varrock lowered his head until their eyes were level. "Some," he replied, his voice a gentle rumble, "have never tried." He closed the small distance between them, touching his forehead gently to hers. In that single, profound moment, all the boundaries that separated them, dragon and human, guardian and healer, ancient creature and mortal woman, seemed to melt away. They were as insubstantial as the fading embers that still floated in the air above them, each one a tiny, glowing spark of possibility. The lonely dragon who once hoarded gold and nursed old grudges now guarded something far more precious. He guarded a family that had chosen him, a community that had learned to trust him, and a heart that had, after centuries of cold solitude, finally remembered how to love. Thank you for watching. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need a little magic today. We'll see you in the next one.